History has its rhythms: wars, treaties, revolutions. But every so often, it stumbles. A detail doesn't add up. A traveler appears from nowhere. A town dances itself into ruin. No motive. No warning. No clear cause. These aren't myths. They're documented, witnessed, investigated, and yet still unsolved. Join us as we trace the outline of events that defy reason, episodes where something slipped through the cracks of time and left only questions behind. Events so precise, so strange, they feel less like accidents and more like interruptions. The Vanishing Manuscript of Mont Saint-Michel. In the quiet hours before dawn on a spring morning in 1884, the sea fog clung low to the tidal flats surrounding Mont Saint-Michel. Monks in brown robes moved through the abbey's echoing corridors, their chants swallowed by stone walls and centuries of silence. But that morning, something else stirred within the ancient monastery, something no one could explain. Brother Auguste, a senior scribe and historian of the Benedictine order, had retired late the night before, having catalogued a series of unusual parchment scrolls unearthed during a recent restoration of the crypt below the chapel of St. Stephen. These scrolls, reportedly written in a language not easily identifiable somewhere between Latin and something older, were found wrapped in oilcloth, wedged behind the stone base of an old altar. The discovery had excited the small monastic community. Brother Auguste believed it might be a fragment of the Gesta Normanorum Obscurorum, a rumored chronicle lost after the Norman conquest. But by morning, both the scrolls and Brother Auguste had vanished. No sign of struggle was found. His chamber was undisturbed. A single candle had burned down to the base. His shoes remained beside his cot. The scrolls, carefully flattened and weighted with small stones the night before, were no longer in the scriptorium. Only the faint scent of oil and a peculiar reddish smudge on the edge of the writing desk remained. Iron oxide, perhaps, or something stranger. The local gendarmerie investigated, but with little interest. They chalked it up to a fugue state or quiet madness, dismissing the monks' accounts as the imaginings of cloistered men. But the mystery did not end there. Over the following year, 3 more monks disappeared each, having spent time examining the recovered scrolls before their disappearance. Brother Henri was last seen pacing the ramparts, mumbling about, the mouth beneath the tide. Brother Luc was found days later in a state of delirium, having attempted to walk across the mudflats toward Tombelaine Rock, muttering phrases in an unidentifiable language before collapsing. He never spoke again. Brother Jerome, the abbey's librarian, became increasingly paranoid. He began locking away anything older than the 15th century, scribbling warnings in the margins of illuminated manuscripts. "It watches from the water," he wrote beside a depiction of Saint Michael slaying the dragon. Then, one evening, he too disappeared, leaving behind only a faint trail of wet footprints that ended at the chapel door. Whispers began to emerge among the lay staff and occasional visiting clerics, rumors of a low humming that could be heard beneath the stone floors of the chapel during the hours just before sunrise. One novice claimed he had seen a shadow move inside a locked chamber near the refectory, though no entryway was found. The scrolls themselves, if they ever existed, were never seen by anyone outside the order. No photographs, no rubbings, no transcripts. Only the sparse diary entries of Brother Auguste remain, penned in his tight, meticulous hand. April 3rd. Language resists decoding, structure not purely Latin, symbols interspersed like star maps or geometric incantations. Feeling of vertigo while reading. April 5th. Smell of brine when opened. Faint whispering likely in my head. Must remember to fast tomorrow. April 6th. Nigrum Portum mentioned again. Appears to be a place, or a gate. What was the Nigrum Portam, the Black Gate? No known location bears that name, but the term appears in at least 2 other obscure texts from the region, once in a 14th century alchemical treatise found in Rouen, and once in the margins of a map of the Cotentin Peninsula drawn by a monk named Mathieu de Cherbourg in 1311. In both cases, the references are sparse and cryptic. In the alchemical treatise, the phrase accompanies an illustration of concentric circles surrounding a small island labeled with a Latin phrase, porta qua non revertitur, the gate from which there is no return. There are rumors spaced in hushed tones among old librarians in Caen and Bayeux that a suppressed section of the Bayeux tapestry once depicted Mont Saint-Michel with a black archway beneath the sea, stitched in dark wall, that has since been picked away. There is no proof, of course, but the idea has lingered. The French Ministry of Culture briefly surveyed the abbey grounds in the early 1900s, prompted by a local historian who connected the disappearances to a suppressed regional legend. According to a 17th century pamphlet found in Caen, there was once a rite performed during low tide, in which the monks would descend into a hidden chamber beneath the crypt. There, it was said, an oracle stone whispered visions to those who knelt before it. The pamphlet was unsigned, and its authenticity is contested. One unconfirmed account, found in the private letters of a Jesuit scholar named René Giraud, describes a visit to the island in 1887. In his letter to a colleague in Prague, Giraud wrote, "There are hours, namely between 2 and 4 in the morning, when the abbey breathes, not metaphorically. It expands and contracts like the chest of a sleeping giant. Mont Saint-Michel, perched on its tidal rock, has always existed between worlds, the physical and the symbolic, the sacred and the profane. But for the remaining monks, the scrolls represented something far older than Christian law." Brother Pierre, the last monk to speak publicly about the incident before the order ceased outside contact in 1892, gave a statement to a visiting ethnographer named Etienne Malraux. "They do not come from our faith." The words, when read aloud, bend the room. Time lingers strangely. I saw Auguste look through the stone as though it were water. He wept, then he laughed. Malraux later attempted to publish his findings but was found dead in his apartment 3 months later, slumped over a desk with a map of Mont Saint-Michel, marked heavily in charcoal. His manuscript, titled The Salt Gate and Other French Mysteries, was never found. 3 decades later, in 1927, a diver named Laurent Dumont attempted to explore the submerged caverns beneath the abbey's base during an exceptionally low tide. He was an amateur archaeologist, convinced the legend held truth. His diving bell was recovered, intact but empty. The tether rope had not been cut. Inside was his notebook, pages swollen from seawater. Scrawled across one page, in a trembling hand, were the words, "The door breathes." In 1956, during renovations to reinforce the western wall of the abbey, workers unearthed a sealed trapdoor under the floor of the transept. The stone bore no markings, only an indentation the size of a human palm. When pressed, it reportedly emitted a low, resonant tone, but the trapdoor itself refused to open. Within days, the workers refused to return, citing intense nausea and vivid nightmares. The renovation quietly halted. Today, Mont Saint-Michel remains a tourist destination, a marvel of medieval architecture rising like a dream from the sea. Few visitors know that beneath its cobbled paths and vaulted chapels may lie a secret chamber long since sealed, or a manuscript not written by any known hand. Occasionally, local guides still speak of the Red Smudge Chamber, though none will confirm its location. One, when pressed, replied cryptically, "Sometimes the tide doesn't just return, sometimes it remembers," and with that, she turned and walked back into the mist. The phantom column of Pompeii. The sun rose gently over the ruins of Pompeii, casting long shadows across the ash-laden stone paths. Tourists trickled through the once-buried city each morning, cameras ready, marveling at the silence that had followed catastrophe. But on the morning of March 19, 1938, a peculiar incident unfolded in the Forum that would remain locked in the annals of archaeological strangeness. Professor Emilio Terenzio, a respected antiquarian from Naples, was leading a small team of graduate researchers from the University of Bologna. Their focus that season had been a newly uncovered section of the Forum's eastern colonnade. While the site itself had been photographed and catalogued extensively since its first exposure in 1813, Terenzio believed a misalignment in the layout suggested that one of the pillars had once supported something more than just decorative stone. At precisely 6:42 a.m., as recorded in the notes of assistant researcher Marietta Sforza, the team witnessed something they could not explain. A column over 3 meters high emerged gradually from the soil near the Temple of Jupiter. Not crumbled or broken, but whole, complete, as though the earth had decided to return it. It stood there for 27 minutes. The team documented it furiously. Photographs were taken, sketches made. One student, a young man named Luca Marchesi, walked around it several times, remarking on the coolness of the stone and its flawless surface. There was no dust, no pitting, no evidence of erosion. It was untouched by time. Then, as the church bell rang for 7 o'clock from the nearby sanctuary of the Madonna of the Rosary, the column vanished. Not toppled, not taken gone. No sound accompanied its departure. No shift in the soil. The earth bore no evidence that anything had ever risen there at all. Photographs developed later that afternoon showed only bare ground. In every single frame, the sketches remained. So did the impressions in notebooks, but the physical proof had disappeared. The event was quietly reported to the archaeological authority in Rome. Their response was swift but vague, a denial that such a thing could occur, followed by a quiet reassignment of Terenzio and the sudden retraction of his team's excavation permit. Months later, an unsigned note appeared in the margins of a stored volume in the University Library in Bologna. It read, "Column not temporal artifact. Recurrent cycle approximately 11.3 years. Next appearance, July 3, 1949. No one ever admitted to writing the note. That same year, in late autumn, a French scholar named Émile Benoit published a pamphlet under the pseudonym E.B. Orne, entitled Stone Echoes, Apparitions in Antiquity. In it, he described similar occurrences throughout Europeculums, statues, and plinths appearing and disappearing without warning, almost always near sites of historical trauma. One chapter, titled The Pompeii Interval, included a brief mention of Terenzio's column, calling it a manifestation of mnemonic architecture. The idea that buildings, like memories, could reassert themselves briefly into the physical world was not entirely new. Roman folklore is peppered with tales of echo-ruined structures seen at dusk and gone by morning. But never had such a thing occurred with trained witnesses present, cameras at the ready, and detailed logs to back it up. In 1949, on the night before the predicted reappearance, a small team of amateur archaeologists gathered in secret, equipped with newer cameras and a portable oscilloscope borrowed from a nearby engineering school. They waited. They watched. Nothing happened. Not on July 3rd, nor the week after. But on July 31st, 3:17 a.m., a guard patrolling the site claimed he saw something too tall to be a man standing where the column had once risen. He did not investigate further. Stranger still were the accounts that began to emerge from tourists visiting Pompeii in the years that followed. Some claimed to have photographs that included extra pillars not present when the photo was taken. Others reported a chilling sensation when walking near the eastern colonnade, as though passing through an unseen current. In 1954, a British professor of antiquity named Harold Frayne published an obscure journal entry describing a column of gleaming, white travertine that he sketched while visiting Pompeii during an unusually overcast August. His sketch, later rediscovered in a storage vault at King's College, matches the column described by Terenzio's team almost perfectly. Frayne, however, never mentioned the drawing again. The idea of time-locked architecture began to gain traction in fringe circles. One theory proposed by Czech physicist Elena Vitkova in 1961 suggested that certain objects, especially those involved in mass death or catastrophe, might become temporarily unstable due to extreme energetic trauma. Pompeii, buried alive under volcanic ash in 79 AD, would be the ideal crucible for such anomalies. Vitkova's paper, published in a limited-run Czech academic journal, included a diagram titled Trauma Anchors. Pompeii's forum sat at the center of one such anchor point. She theorized that time, like rock, could fracture under pressure. And when it did, pieces of the past might momentarily realign. The Italian government never publicly acknowledged the Terenzio event, but curiously, starting in the mid-1960s, excavation permits around the forum's eastern colonnade became far more difficult to obtain. An unofficial memo, obtained in 1982 by historian Giancarlo Bellini, instructed surveyors to avoid disruptive interference with legacy strata in anomalous sectors. The language was bureaucratic, the intent unclear. In 1974, during a school field trip, a group of students from Milan took several Polaroids at the base of the Temple of Jupiter. One photograph, when developed, showed a man in 19th century clothing standing beside what appeared to be a column with unusual carvings. The man's identity was never determined. He did not appear in any other photographs from the trip. Experts who analyzed the image concluded that while it had not been tampered with, the perspective and lighting made the figure difficult to explain. The column, likewise, bore no resemblance to any known existing structure in the area. Over the decades, the story faded into quiet obscurity. Terenzio died in 1959, his final years spent teaching at a small private school in Caserta. He never again spoke of the column, not even to his closest colleagues, but his journals, bequeathed to the Biblioteca Nazionale in Naples, contain one final entry, dated June 28, 1949. There is no reason it should reappear, and yet I feel it. In the stones, in the ground itself. Memory is not just of the mind, the land remembers. And still today, If you stand at the forum's eastern edge before sunrise, just as the light begins to break over the ruins, you might feel it, that low, almost imperceptible hum beneath your feet. A vibration, a flicker, a presence, as though something ancient stirs just below the surface, not quite ready to return but not entirely gone either. The casket of Almazan. In the summer of 1907, deep within the sun-seared valleys of northern Tunisia, a French-led archaeological expedition stumbled upon something that would never make it into official records. Led by Henri Vallon, a respected antiquarian affiliated with the École des Hautes Études, the team was excavating the ruins of ancient Thugga when their foreman's pick struck basalt beneath a crumbling layer of limestone. What emerged was not a sarcophagus nor an urn, but a rectangular casket carved from a single block of jet-black basalt. It bore no inscriptions, no decorative motifs, no hinges or latch, just an objectum blemished and silent. And yet, in Vallon's own words, it felt like a sealed sentence, not meant to be spoken aloud. Despite its modest size, it took 4 men to lift it onto a wooden sled. The basalt absorbed heat yet remained cold, even under the brutal Tunisian sun. Attempts to open the casket failed. Tools bounced off its surface. Acid left no impression. It seemed impervious to all forms of intrusion, as though resisting not only touch but comprehension. That night, the winds changed. The camp cook claimed the air grew dense. A laborer named Saeed, normally quiet, began speaking in tongues during sleep phrases none recognized. Another man vomited after approaching the casket, claiming he felt a pressure behind his eyes, like something trying to look out. Vallon began having vivid nightmares, visions of submerged cities, rust-colored oceans, and a colossal eye that blinked without closing. By the 3rd day, discipline in the camp was breaking down. The casket was shrouded in canvas and sealed into a crate marked for transport to the French consulate in Bizerte. Vallon wanted it gone, but the crate never arrived. According to railway records, the cargo reached the Jeddah station. After that, its trail vanished. The manifest ended mid-sentence. No logs of onward shipment, no official record of arrival. The crate and the casket within ceased to exist on paper. In 1932, a retired customs officer named Gérard Lemoine came forward in a little red provincial journal. He claimed to have seen a crate matching the casket's description being loaded onto a private cart by men in unfamiliar military uniforms. Their insignia bore a Triskelion symbol, 3 spiraled legs around a black circle. Lemoine's account was never followed up. That same symbol would later appear briefly in a 1943 OSS dossier regarding non-standard assets confiscated during Operation Torch. That document, too, was redacted. The next trace came not from government or military records, but from the margins of academia. In 1941, the occult historian Thérèse Minot penned a letter to a colleague in Prague. "You ask about the casket from Thugga. I must warn you, it is not a casket. It is a lock, a prison, one whose key was never meant to be forged by human hands." Minot died in an apartment fire 2 months later. The cause was listed as faulty wiring, though firemen reported no signs of electrical malfunction. Her papers were seized by unknown authorities. The name Almazan did not enter the narrative until decades later. In 1948, a fragment of a 12th century Arabic text from Kairouan University referenced a thing called Almazan, wrapped not in cloth, but in forgetting. Its resting place was described as beneath the mountain's eye, a phrase interpreted by scholars as a poetic reference to the hills outside Thugger. By the 1960s, rumors of the black box of Almasan had seeped into the underground currents of esoteric circles. Some believed it contained a relic older than Phoenician settlement, others called it a gate. In 1968, a Swedish diplomat stationed in Tunis reported encountering a black basalt casket in the basement of the Grand Hotel de France. He claimed it was shown to him by a man calling himself Father Irenaeus, who spoke in strained Latin and referred to the box as Domus Veritas, House of Truth. The diplomat was transferred days later. The Grand Hotel's basement has since been sealed. In 1983, renovations at a crumbling customs house near La Goulette revealed a hollow cavity beneath the stone foundation. Within it were fragments, broken edges of something once solid, carved from black basalt. The engineer overseeing the dig, Edouard Pinchon, resigned immediately. His assistant fled the country within the month. Left behind was a single sketch, in a field notebook, showing jagged shards, and a note, "Burns to the touch. Smells of salt and rosemary." Then came silence. The French Ministry of Foreign Affairs, in a memo quietly declassified in 1991, referred to a Category C antiquity volatile, pre-Roman, non-disclosure enforced, lost in colonial transport. While no object was named, the timing and terminology aligned precisely with Vallen's lost casket. It resurfaced again something like it in 2006, when journalist Salim Bouazizi published a series of articles in Le Courrier de l'Atlas. He claimed that a villa outside Sidi Bou Said was housing an object resembling the Almasan artifact. The family residing there had begun experiencing time slips, repeated conversations, reversed aging in photographs, clocks ticking backwards. Bouazizi retracted his claims months later. His editorial team resigned en masse. The publication's online archive vanished for nearly a year. The villa, now listed as the residence of a European envoy. Security is tight, no public access permitted. Folklore surrounding the artifact has only grown. In the mountains near El Kef, elders tell of a nightstone that drinks dreams. Ethnographer Lila Chafik recorded the tale of a girl who found a box in her father's orchard. She opened it. That night, she began sleepwalking in perfect circles. On the third night, she vanished. Only her footprints remained, spiraling inward to a patch of scorched grass. Theories continue to multiply. Some believe the casket was never meant to be open, not because of what it held, but because of what it was preventing from crossing. A seal, not a container. Others believe it was made not by any known civilization, but left behind during a forgotten age when human memory still had teeth. A few suggest it isn't even an object in the traditional sense. One physicist at the University of Geneva proposed that the casket might represent a form of anchored singularity, a point in time and space where natural laws momentarily fail. No government agency has claimed it. No museum lists it. And yet, it continues to appear in whispers, notebooks, restricted memos, and fragments that shouldn't exist. The land where it was first unearthed has grown quiet again. But those who walk the edges of Thugger at dusk sometimes speak of sudden drops in temperature, of a scentsy salt and rosemary hanging in the air without wind, and of a sound beneath the soil, like stone shifting against stone. Whatever the casket of Almasan is, it has not finished speaking. It has only paused, listening, waiting, not to be opened, but to open, the Palace of the Hollow One. In the deserts of modern-day Turkmenistan, near the ruins of the ancient city of Merv, lies a place barely spoken of in the records, a vanished structure that, for centuries, existed only in fragments of poetry and whispered accounts from caravans that veered too far from the Silk Road. It was called the Palace of the Hollow One. No maps lead to it. No official excavation has uncovered its remains, and yet references to it persist across time and culture, always cryptic, always incomplete. The first known mention appears in a 10th century manuscript attributed to Ibn al-Karaji, a mathematician and engineer who wrote of a great echoing house of polished black stone, where no shadow falls. He claimed the locals feared it, saying the walls held the memory of voices not their own. In a passage buried between his diagrams on water wheels and hydraulics, he wrote, "The desert swallowed it once and will again. But the Hollow One is not done speaking." No scholar could say what he meant. In 1221, during the Mongol invasion of Khwarezm, a fleeing scribe named Sadun al-Razi took shelter with a group of travelers heading southwest from Nishapur. In his hastily compiled travel journal, he describes encountering a structure made of basalt with no door and a dome that sang when the wind changed. The group passed it in silence. A shepherd among them crossed himself. Sadun writes, "They call it the Hollow House, for it is built for one who is not there." The scribe's account vanished for nearly 700 years. It resurfaced in the collection of a Polish rare book dealer in 1923. Margins of the original folio were scorched. One page was missing, cut out cleanly with a blade. By the 19th century, the ruins of Merv were a favored destination of imperial cartographers and Russian adventurers. One such explorer, Colonel Ilya Voroshin, wrote of discovering an unusual formation of basalt slabs 50 kilometers southeast of the known city perimeter. In his field notebook, now archived in a Moscow museum, he sketched the slabs and annotated the entry. "Not ruins, but arrangement, like a door with no hinge. Whispers under wind. Horses refuse approach." Local guides, when asked, became tight-lipped. One reportedly muttered, "Kwalaye Kali," the empty fortress, and refused to go on. The phrase appears again in a 1907 Persian anthology of desert ghost tales. In the story, a caravan stumbles upon a black dome during a sandstorm. Inside, they find a single room containing no objects, only a stone basin filled with perfectly still water. One man looks into it and begins to weep. When asked what he saw, he says, "It showed me the day I leave this world." The next morning, he is gone. His camel stands untouched. Is the palace a metaphor, an archetype buried in oral tradition? Or was there truly a structure so strange, so unsettling, that time itself could not hold its coordinates? In 1998, a satellite imaging team studying wind erosion patterns in the Karakum Desert noted a rectangular anomaly near the dried riverbed of the Murghab. The data was dismissed as geological noise. But in 2002, a French ethno-linguist named Dr. Lucienne Ferrand followed up with a field expedition. What she found would never be published. Her personal notes, released only after her death in 2016, tell of reaching a zone where GPS malfunctioned, compasses spun erratically, and the silence was impossibly thick. Her team found no structure, but claimed to hear tones not like music, but resonance, as though the air remembered something. One assistant reportedly fainted. Another developed a phasian inability to process language that lasted 3 days. Ferrand herself wrote of a recurring dream. A hollow man seated on a basalt throne, his face blank yet familiar. He waited for me to ask a question, she wrote. But I didn't know which one. That phrase, the hollow one, recurs across centuries. In 15th century Armenian epics, a nameless ruler is said to dwell in a black palace no one can find twice. In Uyghur desert legends, a king with no voice guards a temple buried beneath dust, and those who hear his silence go mad. Even a medieval Tibetan scroll, now housed in a private London collection, speaks of the great still room where the stone sings and time forgets itself. Modern archaeologists avoid these stories. Too inconsistent, no evidence, no trace, yet the references persist. In 2020, a group of trekkers traveling through the Karakum Desert reported finding a patch of glass-smooth black stone measuring 20 feet across, perfectly flat, and warm to the touch despite the freezing air. One of the hikers uploaded a photo to a niche geological forum before deleting it days later. The caption read, "We found the floor, nothing else. But it feels like a room." A geologist later contacted the user for coordinates. The message bounced. In 2021, a geospatial anomaly report from a European remote sensing team found a heat signature in the same region brief. Faint but distinct. A single square footprint, warmer than the surrounding desert by nearly 5°C, appearing just after twilight and vanishing before dawn. No follow-up was permitted by their sponsors. No explanation was published. Some believe the palace was never built in stone and mortar but in memory. A structure that manifests only under the right conditions. Others argue it was real and buried by time, war, and shifting sands. Still others believe it was never a place, but a presence housed wherever it was needed. In 2023, an anonymous archaeologist leaked a fragment of correspondence, allegedly from a Turkmen intelligence division. The letter warned of unauthorized interest in Site 46A and noted persistent field interference and personnel disorientation. There was mention of echo profiles inconsistent with known geology. The location was redacted, but the letter closed with a sentence that chills even without context. He is still listening. The hollow one waits, and when the wind turns just right, the desert will reveal what it forgot to bury. But what it reveals may not be ruins. It may be something that remembers us better than we remember it. A palace not abandoned but watching. Empty, but not alone. The bells of Isidora. In the mountain cradle of eastern Spain, along a stretch of forgotten trail that cuts between the shadowed limestone cliffs of the Valencian hinterlands, lies the ruined village of Isidora. It does not appear on most modern maps. You will not find signposts. Its story is not taught in schools, nor mentioned in regional archives. And yet, for centuries, travelers have spoken of its bells that ring, though no one lives there. The earliest known mention of Isidora appears in a 1611 letter written by a Jesuit cartographer named Matteo Lorente, who noted a cluster of stone houses and a small but elegant bell tower built from pale red sandstone. The letter was addressed to a colleague in Zaragoza and contains a peculiar line. "I saw no people, but I heard the bells at dawn and dusk. They did not chime, they wept." That phrasing appears again in later records. In 1742, a courtier traveling from Valencia to Teruel stopped to rest beneath the village's empty gate. He wrote in his diary, "The sound came from above, slow and mournful. I looked up. The bell swung, but no hand moved it." By the mid-19th century, Isadora had become a minor curiosity to antiquarians. An 1856 expedition by the Royal Historical Society of Madrid noted the absence of residents but confirmed the village layout. 2 intersecting streets, a collapsed granary, a dried fountain, and the tower still intact. The bell remains suspended, one researcher wrote, though the tower's rope has long since rotted. Local legend attributes Isadora's fate to a long-dead noblewoman, Doña Isabel de Rueda, who, in the 1500s, was said to have built the bell tower in penance. Her son, the story goes, was a soldier who never returned from the War of the League of Cognac. When news of his death reached her, she ordered the bell cast in his name, its metal mixed with a chain he once wore. The bell was not meant to call to prayer. But the story darkens. Some versions claim that Isabel rang the bell each day until her death, then instructed it never be rung again. Others say the bell rang once on its own, years after her burial, and that those who heard it dreamed of open graves and voices behind doors. In 1901, a Belgian ethnographer named Henri Van Taal visited the region during his research on Iberian mourning customs. He recorded a night spent near the ruins, where he awoke to a sound like hollow brass echoing inside bone. He described the sensation not as hearing, but as feeling the bell in my teeth. His report was never published. It remained hidden among his papers until discovered by a graduate student in 1997. No definitive census ever listed the population of Isadora. By the time of the Spanish Civil War, it had faded entirely from documentation, and yet isolated reports of the bell continued. In 1943, a Royal Air Force pilot flying a transport route to Gibraltar reported hearing church bells beneath the clouds while passing over the region. There was no village below, no churches, just rocky forest. In 1962, a hiker from Barcelona claimed to have spent the night near the site. His statement to a local paper reads, "At 3-11 in the morning, the bell rang once. The sound came from inside my head. I thought I was dreaming until my dog began howling." Modern paranormal researchers have attempted to measure electromagnetic or sonic anomalies around the ruins, but nothing definitive has been found. Instruments malfunction. Recordings turn up blank. A 1988 study by a Madrid University team was halted after 3 participants reported identical dreams, standing in a room made entirely of stone, while a bell tolled somewhere deep underground. One theory suggests infrasounder low-frequency vibration below the threshold of human hearing may be at play, possibly generated by wind passing through the tower's narrow slits. But that does not explain why the bell appears to move, or why some claim to see light inside the broken tower at night. A priest named Father Ernesto Pino attempted a spiritual investigation in 1995. He brought holy water, incense, and a small team of parishioners. They prayed beneath the bell tower at dusk. No sound was heard that evening, but during the night, 2 members of his group woke screaming. They claimed to hear a voice behind the bell. Father Ernesto resigned from his parish 6 weeks later. He never returned to the site. More curious still are the disappearances. In 2004, a group of amateur historians attempted a documentary on abandoned Iberian villages. Their footage includes a brief segment in Isadora, just 20 seconds of static-filled frames, showing the tower from a distance. None of the group has spoken publicly since. The lead researcher, Sylvia Marquez, was found wandering along the highway 2 days later, dehydrated and silent. She has not spoken since. A team from a Spanish mystery podcast visited in 2016. Audio from their trip records laughter, footsteps, wind, and then clear as day the bell striking once. Yet the team claims they heard nothing at the time. The bell has no inscription, no maker's mark. Its surface is dull, pitted with time but unbroken. When touched, it hums slightly, not a sound exactly, but a presence. One visitor described it as a mouth that never closes. Why does it ring? For whom? In a private letter dated 2019, a sound engineer who visited the village with his daughter wrote, "She asked me why the bell was sad. I told her bells can't feel. She said, 'That one can, it misses her.'" He never explained who her was. The village of Isadora is still not on the map. Satellite imagery shows nothing but stone and grass. But hikers say they find idleways just past where the path ends, always near a bend in the hills, always after the wind shifts, and always the tower remains. In 2022, an archivist in Tarragona uncovered a faded vellum folio in a box marked Miscellaneous Ecclesiastic Fragments. It contained a single passage in Catalan, apparently a transcription of a much older oral tale. The lines read, "The bell tolls when the living speak the name of one who has been forgotten. It remembers the soul that memory has let slip." Researchers traced the transcription style to the late 1400s, possibly predating Doña Isabel herself. Even stranger is a modern incident. In early 2023, a satellite weather balloon over eastern Spain recorded atmospheric disturbances localized in the Isadora region. The data showed a sudden pressure drop, followed by a spike in low-frequency vibrations. The event lasted just under 27 seconds. A review of the balloon's camera footage revealed only one anomaly, a tiny glint of movement from what appeared to be a collapsed stone structure. In the audio file, a single tone, faint, metallic. A scientist reviewing the file described the sound as an unresolved chord, like something trying to finish a song it never learned. Theories have only grown. Some believe the bell was forged, not just from iron, but memory, that the chain melted into it acts as a tether between the living and those long forgotten. Others believe the village lies atop a fault in time itself, where echoes from the past still ring in our ears. Still others believe the bell was never meant to call to the heavens but to hold something below in place. And so it rings. At dawn, at dusk, or when no one is listening, when the wind dies down, when someone remembers, the bell remembers too, it waits. And if you ever literally hear it, you will not forget, because it will not let you. The Library of Flesh. In a quiet quarter of Prague's old city, nestled between two Baroque townhouses, there once stood a building without a name. No street number adorned the door, no sign marked its purpose. But those who entered it, few as they were, called it only one thing: the Library of Flesh. The earliest record of its existence comes from a 1583 letter penned by Bohemian alchemist Antonin Gessner. Writing to his colleague in Vienna, he described a curiously mute house with windows covered in what he claimed were not curtains, but tanned leather. Gessner noted that when he passed it by candlelight, the windows shivered not from wind, but as if reacting to his gaze. "It watches," he wrote, "though it has no eyes." It is believed the building was erected sometime in the late 1400s, but no architectural plans remain. The structure does not appear on any maps before the 18th century, and when it does, it is labelled only as Residuum D. Scholars have long debated what the designation meant. Some claim it stands for residuales, a Latin term meaning that which remains. Others insist it was a bureaucratic placeholder for something the cartographers refused to name. By the early 1600s, rumours circulated of a private collection held within its wall-texts, bound in pale material, too supple to be parchment. A Jesuit historian named Martin Krennek recorded a strange anecdote in his 1610 diary. A visiting bishop, the story goes, was taken to the library as a guest of a minor nobleman. He emerged pale, trembling, and unable to speak for 3 days. When he recovered, he said only, "They wrote with blood, but not their own." The description may have been metaphor, or perhaps not. In 1689, a fire consumed 3 city blocks in Prague's Mala Strana district. The library was untouched, despite flames licking at its neighboring walls. Firefighters claimed the building was unnaturally cold. One man reported ice forming on his uniform when he approached. Another claimed he heard a voice say, "This knowledge will not burn." By the 1700s, the house had developed a quiet reputation among occult scholars. A German mystic named Hildebrandt Voss allegedly spent 3 nights within, copying a diagram he called the spiral tongue. He claimed it revealed a grammar older than speech itself. Voss died shortly after, having carved the same sigil into the stone of his cellar walls, floor to ceiling. When his home was demolished in 1904, no chisel marks could be found. The stone had not been etched, it had warped. In 1812, the Austrian poet and physician Lucas Meissner published a strange text titled Thesaurus Corporalis. In it, he references a library where the shelves are warm and the spines pulse faintly when touched. He describes books that open with a sigh and others that bleed if read too quickly. He does not name the library directly, but the descriptions match earlier accounts precisely. One passage reads, "To understand the tongue of the red pages is to dream in reverse. They speak of things that have not yet occurred and ache when disbelieved." The Library of Flesh vanished from record entirely during the 20th century. Urban development swallowed the district. Apartment blocks rose, roads expanded, but something peculiar persisted. The footprint of the library remained untouched. Satellite images show a narrow lot, 7.3 meters wide, where no structure stands yet, no building ever encroaches. The space appears blank, and yet property records list it as continuously owned since 1489. No owner is named, taxes are always paid. Attempts to build on the lot have failed. In 1976, a construction crew attempted to erect a parking structure. Equipment failed. Concrete refused to set. Workers reported migraines, nausea, and a recurring auditory hallucination, a low murmur, like pages turning underwater. After 3 days, the project was abandoned. What exactly was stored in the library? Fragments of recovered testimonies suggest that the collection consisted of volumes written in languages no longer spoken, some of which had never been recorded elsewhere. One text, described only as the Flensing Gospel, was said to contain no wordsonly long vertical lines etched into fibrous sheets that grew darker with prolonged viewing. A former librarian at Charles University, who claimed to have seen a single page, later developed an aversion to light and confined herself to her cellar until her death. Other descriptions speak of tomes with moving text words that rearranged themselves when looked at directly. A French medium in 1891 claimed the library was a veil between vessels, and that to read its books was to invite the touch of the original authors, none of whom had ever been human. One name appears more frequently than others in whispered accounts: the binder. Sometimes described as a man, sometimes as a cloaked figure with no face, the binder was said to curate the library, selecting who may enter and what may be read. Those who disrespected the rules, reading too long, copying texts, or trying to remove pages were never seen again. An 1857 police record notes the disappearance of a Russian diplomat's assistant, last seen walking into the alley beside the library's location. His coat was found neatly folded at the alley's entrance. Inside the pocket, a single page of text, written in ink, later identified as oxblood. The language was undecipherable, but experts noted it bore a similarity to Linear A. In 2005, a Czech sound artist named Ivana Burasova conducted a resonance scan of the surrounding block while researching acoustic shadows in urban spaces. Her microphone picked up low-frequency vibrations in the blank low-triangular pulses at intervals of 88.2 seconds. When converted into audio, the signal resembled faint breathing. She presented her findings at a university conference in Brno. The recording was played once. Afterward, 3 attendees reported recurring dreams of rooms lined with ribbed shelves, and a voice reciting words I forgot before I woke. One dropped out of her program entirely. By 2014, Prague City Council attempted to rezone the lot for public use. Legal appeals were immediately filed by no known individual. The paperwork was flawless. No signature, no address. But the language mimicked antique Czech dialects unused since the 17th century. The petition succeeded. The lot remains closed. In 2020, a fog bank lingered over that single block for 6 days. Local meteorologists could not explain it. The fog stopped precisely at the property line. Inside it, light dimmed unnaturally. One man entered on a dare. He returned an hour later, mute and pale, clutching a bundle of thin parchment pressed against his chest. The pages were blank. They were also warm. To this day, the lot remains untouched. Children dare each other to touch its iron gate. Visitors sometimes hear faint rustling within, though no trees grow there. Some say the building still stands thinly veiled, waiting. And sometimes, just before dawn, passers-by hear the creak of a spine opening. In late 2022, an archivist at the National Library of the Czech Republic uncovered a sealed envelope hidden behind a false panel in the basement archives. Inside was a fragment of manuscript, no author, no title, only one sentence written in precise Gothic hand. Ink fades, but flesh remembers. The fragment was tested for age. The paper registered as biological tissue. The archivist, whose name was not released, later resigned without explanation. There are now rumors of sightings. People claiming to glimpse movement inside the empty lot during twilight hours. A silhouette, sometimes tall, sometimes stooped, always still. One witness, a professor of comparative literature, claimed it was watching her. When asked how she knew, she replied, "It turned the page." The library has no entrance anyone can remember walking through, no windows anyone can describe. But somehow people still find themselves inside. They speak of dim aisles and hushed air, of volumes that throb faintly with heat, of words that whisper as they unfold. Some say it chooses its readers. Others say once you've seen its shelves, a part of you is always catalogued. Because flesh forgets names, but the library never does. It waits, and somewhere within, the binder still writes. The St. Petersburg time collapse. On the night of November 4, 1987, a city of 5 million people vanished if only for 7 seconds. The incident occurred at precisely 3013 a.m. in St. Petersburg, then Leningrad, during one of the coldest winters on record. Across the city, clocks stopped, digital displays blinked to static, and power grids surged. 7 seconds later, everything returned power. Lights, heat. But not everything was as it had been. It began with an old man named Vadim Mirov. A retired physics lecturer, Mirov lived alone in a pre-war apartment on Vasilyevsky Island. He kept meticulous journals, maintained a stable routine, and hadn't left the city in over a decade. His first entry after the event was dated November 5th, but it began, "I woke to the sound of breathing. Not mine, not human. The air in my lungs was thicker, slower. Everything felt rearranged." He described changes, books on his shelves written in Cyrillic, but the grammar subtly wrong. His radio played music he didn't recognize, melodies that echoed but never resolved. His clock read 3:13, though it had been set precisely before bed. And his cat, normally timid, stared at him for over an hour without blinking. By sunrise, hospitals across St. Petersburg reported a surge in patients with disorientation, memory loss, and nosebleeds. One nurse at Hospital No. 31 recalled patients claiming to have seen fractures in the ceiling and hands too large to be real. Most were sedated. Official explanations ranged from solar flare activity to a power grid failure. The media offered little more than silence. But deeper inside the city, the anomaly had left more disturbing traces. The D6 metro tunnel, a decommissioned and secret line once used by Soviet military officials, was reportedly flooded that night. Not with water but with air so pressurized it fused the metal of the maintenance doors. One rescue worker who entered the tunnel to investigate emerged unconscious, bleeding from his ears. His last words before slipping into a coma: "The train wasn't on the track, it was in the walls." Scientists at the Pulkovo Observatory noticed something strange as well. During the exact 7 seconds of the blackout, their telescopes lost tracking alignment, not just locally, but relative to the fixed stars. The Earth had shifted, slightly, imperceptibly to most instruments, but enough to register. And then there were the disappearances. Records show at least 31 individuals vanished that night without a trace. None left their homes, no signs of break-ins or struggle. Some were found days later miles away, in rooms sealed from the inside. One teenage girl, Zoya Tarkova, reappeared inside the Fabergé Museum, despite no alarms being triggered. She was curled beneath a display case, eyes closed, whispering the words, "We were read like pages." The most detailed account came from a tram operator named Dmitry Alexeyev. Driving Route 40 through the Petrogradsky district, he described the lights dimming and the streets folding upward. Like the city became the inside of a bell. His report, originally buried by Soviet authorities, was recovered in 2002. In it, Alexeyev detailed his tram's suspension in a state he called thin air passengers frozen mid-motion, eyes rolling back, mouths open in silence. Outside, time slowed until it stopped altogether. Snowflakes hung motionless. The moon pulsed like a wound. When movement returned, none of his passengers remembered anything. In the weeks that followed, The KGB quietly quarantined several sites across the city. A substation near Palace Square was cordoned off for infrastructure upgrades. A clock tower near Smolny Cathedral was disassembled and never reinstalled. Rumors spread that its gears had turned counterclockwise during the event, and kept doing so even when removed. A physicist from Moscow State University, Dr. Lydia Chernenko, was brought in to examine electromagnetic readings. Her private notes, leaked by a former assistant, describe a temporal pulse that originated beneath the Neva River, something she labeled inversion collapse. One passage reads, "Time did not stop, it inverted." 7 seconds spiraled inward and returned rearranged, like being read and rewritten. Dr. Chernenko's research pointed to something far older than the Soviet power grid. In her final unpublished paper, she proposed that a geometric fault in space-time natural lattice intersected beneath St. Petersburg. According to her theory, the Neva Delta sits on a kind of temporal scar where moments can be overwritten under the right energetic conditions. She noted eerie parallels in the city's past: unexplained fogs in the 18th century, firestorms with no source, and disappearing street blocks reported by cartographers. In the 1990s, following the fall of the Soviet Union, foreign researchers were allowed limited access to archived materials. One visiting researcher, Dr. Alan Ridley, from the UK's chronotopology group, analysed seismographic data from St. Petersburg and surrounding oblasts. He found microquakes clustered exactly at 3:13 a.m., but they did not radiate outward like natural events. Instead, the pulses moved inward as though the city had collapsed momentarily into itself. Local legends began to resurface. Tales once dismissed as superstition took on new relevance. In 18th century journals by Finnish mystic Mikael Korhonen, there is mention of a white night when Peter's city forgets its shape, and a warning that to walk during that breathless hour is to invite remembrance. These stories seemed absurd until a hidden chamber was discovered beneath the Hermitage Museum in 2011. Sealed behind a false wall, it contained antique surveying equipment, stacks of coded notebooks, and a single phrase carved into the stone in Old Church Slavonic. The clock does not tick, it waits. This chamber had no documented origin, no records of its construction, but forensic dating suggested the stonework had been altered in the early 1800s and again in the 1980s. Who returned to it and why remains unknown. Residents near Vasilievsky Island still speak of the third sound, heard only on windless nights. It is not the tolling of a bell or the whisper of air. They say it's a folded echo, like hearing your own voice before you speak. A cafe owner named Ilya Petrov once described it this way: you feel like you've already had the conversation you're about to have, but differently, slightly wrong, like time hiccuped. One of the most compelling unofficial investigations came from a private group known as the Memory Line Initiative. In 2018, they ran a synchronized watch experiment on both banks of the Neva River. All 1,312 watches, analog, digital, atomic, froze for exactly 7 seconds. At 3:13 a.m., local police dispersed the gathering before more tests could be performed. But video footage shows something inexplicable. For 7 seconds, the sky above the river turned a dull copper, and the sound from every recording device dropped out completely. In the years since, several witnesses from that night, in 1987, have reported recurring dreams. Always the same setting. A frozen tram car suspended above a river, faces locked in silent terror. And a voice never seen, always heard repeating one line, "You are remembered, you are rewritten, again." To this day, no official explanation has been offered. The Russian Federation's archives on the 1987 anomaly remain sealed under classification orders, renewed every 5 years. But once a year, on November 4th, some residents of St. Petersburg still gather quietly on the Palace Bridge at 3:13 a.m. They light candles, they watch their watches, and for 7 seconds they do not speak. They listen, not for the past, but for the moment it tries to return. The smoke that walked. In the summer of 1936, under the scorched sun of southern Algeria, a French Foreign Legion outpost near the Tassili Najer Plateau filed a report so bizarre it never made it past military censors. Titled Observation of Mobile Smoke Phenomenon, the document described a series of sightings by 27 soldiers over the course of 11 days. The smoke, they said, moved against the wind, cast no shadow, and sometimes stood upright like a man. Located deep within the barren ridges of the Hoggar Mountains, the outpost at Fort Zazura had been established just 3 years prior. It was intended to monitor tribal activity and support mineral expeditions in the region. The men stationed there were no strangers to isolation, heat, and the psychological strain that came with endless desert. But what occurred between June 3rd and June 14th of that year defied even the most experienced among them. It began when Corporal Alain Ducrot, tasked with early morning patrol, reported seeing what he thought was a figure standing still in the distance, a tall, robed Tuareg tribesman, seemingly frozen. When Ducrot raised his binoculars, the figure shifted and began to blur, like heat distortion made solid. Then it collapsed inward, becoming a coil of black smoke that slithered away across the sand. Over the next 2 days, similar sightings were reported. In each case, the observers noted the movement seemed deliberate, intelligent. The smoke appeared to respond to human presence. It avoided gunfire, occasionally retreated before being seen, and once, reportedly, circled the perimeter of the fort for over an hour. Several soldiers drew sketches of what they saw. The shapes varied, sometimes tall, sometimes stooped, but always cloaked in trailing tendrils of vapor, featureless and fluid. On the 4th day, Sergeant Henri Lemaitre organized a 5-man patrol to track the anomaly. The men followed it through a narrow canyon marked with ancient petroglyphs. According to Lemaitre's journal, the air temperature dropped significantly during their pursuit. One man, Private Émile Brochard, collapsed with what appeared to be hypothermia despite the 42°C heat. His body was drenched in cold sweat. His pupils were fully dilated. That same night, a second phenomenon occurred. The fort's telegraph system, long unreliable, began to emit strange clicks that did not match Morse code. Operators noted the pattern resembled breathing, rhythmic, inhaling and exhaling. Then came words. One word repeated 8 times. Mirar. It wasn't French nor Arabic, but it had meaning in Spanish, to look. Some took it as a warning, others as an invitation. The commanding officer, Lieutenant Paul Marchand, was a pragmatic man. He assumed desert hallucinations, heat stroke, or perhaps even a local psychological operation by rebels. But by the 7th day, he changed his tone. 3 soldiers, Ducrot among them, had disappeared during the night. Their boots and weapons remained in their tents. The sand outside showed no footprints. The only clue was a thin line of soot trailing away from the barracks into the desert, vanishing after 20 meters. Marchand ordered all journals confiscated and the outpost was placed on lockdown. Rations were reduced to conserve supplies. Sleep became difficult. Men complained of murmurs beneath the floorboards. Several described waking dreams, visions of moving smoke inside stone halls, of figures whispering in a language made of wind. Some awoke with their hands burned, despite no fire. Others had thin cuts across their arms and torsos, as though traced with a razor during the night. On June 11th, a sandstorm rolled in. It lasted nearly 18 hours. When it cleared, a set of prints was found leading to the north edge of the plateau. Not human prints. They were elongated, smoothed, without toe marks, like something heavy had dragged itself through the sand. Yet no trench or furrow accompanied them. Just clean impressions, one after another, across rock and gravel. The final entry in Marchand's field notebook, later recovered from military archives, read, "It is not smoke. Smoke does not watch you. Smoke does not remember your name. I believe we have walked into something that was waiting." On June 14th, the fort ceased communication. A supply caravan found it abandoned 6 days later. No sign of struggle, no blood, no sign of battle. Equipment remained untouched. Journals had been burned. The only remaining object was a single stone, placed at the center of the barracks, carved with symbols not matching any known Tuareg dialect. Its surface had been scorched black, but the rock beneath remained cold to the touch. The French colonial government dismissed the incident as unrecorded desertion, but the surviving telegraph transcripts and partial journal entries were filed into restricted military records. In 1972, a copy of the Marchand Journal surfaced briefly at a university in Marseille, but was seized days later by unknown officials. The librarian who catalogued it, a woman named Delphine Moreau, later wrote an anonymous letter to a French UFO journal. In it, she claimed the journal ended with a drawing of a tall, cylindrical form standing in the desert, with lines radiating from its center like an eye with no pupil. Modern researchers who study the Tassili region have noted that some ancient rock art in the area, dating back 10,000 years, depicts similar shaped tall, tapering figures without features, often surrounded by swirling lines. These figures appear alone, never in groups, and are always painted in a deep black pigment not used in other images. In 2004, satellite thermal imaging over the region detected a consistent heat signature beneath the rock where Fort Zazura once stood. Despite the surrounding desert's baking sun, the coordinates emit a cooler than average reading by approximately 5 degrees Celsius. No known geological feature explains this anomaly. That same year, a team from the University of Algiers attempted to reach the site by air. Their drone malfunctioned 5 kilometers from the target. Footage recovered showed interference beginning the moment the drone passed over a canyon marked with spiral glyphs. The final frame showed what appeared to be a humanoid shape emerging from the canyon wall, itself formed entirely of shadow and dust. Local nomads avoid the site. When asked why, one man replied simply, "The smoke that walks never forgets." Another, when pressed, added, "It wears the shape of what it eats." Today, nothing remains of Fort Zazura but a shallow depression in the sand. No memorial, no plaque, only wind-blown stone and silence. Yet the area continues to resist settlement. Every attempt to build a road or station nearby is met with sudden, unexplained sinkholes or mechanical failure. GPS signals fade. Compass needles turn inward. On the night of June 14th each year, the sky above the Hoggar Range shifts tone just slightly. A subtle dimming that no instrument records but every witness senses. Time seems slower. Wind carries no sound. And in that suspended silence, some say, the smoke returns to walk its old perimeter. Yet on rare occasions, passing surveyors have reported something strange. A distant shape, neither animal nor man, standing motionless in the shimmering haze, not moving, not fading, waiting. And when they move on, they feel it. As if they've been seen, as if their names have already been spoken. The Dancing Plague of 1518. In the sweltering summer of 1518, in the Alsatian city of Strasbourg, part of the Holy Roman Empire, a woman named Frau Trophia stepped out into the cobbled street and began to dance. She didn't sway or skip or sing. She danced with violent, rhythmic intensity, as if caught in some private trance. Her arms swung wildly, her feet pounded the ground. There was no music, no festivity, only her and the sound of leather soles slapping against the stones. She danced for hours, then into the night, then into the following day. Witnesses described her face as strained, not joyous, her eyes unfocused. When neighbors tried to stop her, she shook them off and continued. By the third day, she had collapsed from exhaustion, only to rise again and continue. Within a week, 30 others had joined her. By the end of the month, the number exceeded 400. Strasbourg's physicians were baffled. They ruled out demonic possession, declaring instead that the cause was overheated blood. Their prescription? More dancing, believing the afflicted would recover. By exhausting the excess humors, city officials erected a stage and hired musicians. The dancing intensified, and then people began to die. Some collapsed from sheer fatigue. Others suffered strokes or heart failure. Contemporary accounts claim at least 15 people died each day at the height of the outbreak. Bodies piled beside the stage, built for their recovery. But even that failed to stop the movements. Parish records, merchant letters, and municipal ledgers confirm the episode. The Strasbourg Chronicle of 1519 records, it began with one, and soon there were dozens. They twisted and turned as though bound to invisible strings, and none could say why. Many believed it a curse. Some whispered of Saint Vitus, a Christian martyr said to afflict sinners with involuntary dance. Local law warned of ignoring the saint's feast day. Others spoke of ergotism, poisoning from contaminated rye-but that could not account for the prolonged, coordinated behavior or the selective affliction. The city consulted with physicians from Basel and Cologne. They found no epidemic disease, no toxins, no signs of delirium beyond the dancing itself. All vital signs were normal until the body failed. Strasbourg's city council, increasingly desperate, considered exorcisms but feared inflaming public panic. Oddly, none of the dancers ever remembered their movements. When questioned after collapse, most wept or fell into sleep. A few mumbled incoherently. One man, identified only as Klaus B., reportedly whispered, "They wouldn't stop singing my name." Among the documents recovered from Strasbourg's municipal archive is a letter from a guildmaster named Matthias Krell. He wrote, "It is not the heat, nor the air. I think they are hearing something the rest of us cannot, a rhythm beneath the world." Others agreed. Travelers passing through the region reported feeling strange tugs in their limbs while in town. One merchant from Nuremberg claimed his legs trembled the entire time he stayed in Strasbourg, though he never danced. He left early, writing in his journal, "The city is held in a grip we cannot see." On July 27th, the bishop ordered mass prayers and processions. The dancers were relocated to a shrine atop the mountain of Saverne, where they were made to wear red shoes and walk in circles while priests sang hymns. Some stopped dancing there, others died on the journey. A few were said to scream as they ascended the mountain, claiming the rhythm was pulling them backwards. Then, just as suddenly as it began, the plague ended. The last reported dancer collapsed on August 12th. No explanation was ever confirmed, no toxin was found, no record of punishment, arrest, or prosecution. It simply stopped. But the question lingered: what did they see? What did they hear? In 1977, Dr. Hans Lingen, a German folklorist, uncovered an unpublished Latin treatise from 1523 by a Strasbourg monk named Brother Severus. It contains the following passage: "There was something in their eyes, a flicker, as if they saw a distant fire. They did not move for joy. They moved to not be taken." The phrase non rapiri, not to be taken, repeats often in the manuscript. Brother Severus seemed convinced that the dancers believed their motion protected them from something unseen. He compared their steps to glyphs written with the body, as though the dancing formed a language only the other side could read. This aligns with other European legends from the late medieval period. In certain Baltic villages, children were told that remaining still during the witching hour allowed spirits to enter the body. Movement, they believed, confused the dead. In Romanian folk tales, wanderers who stood still during twilight risked being read by the dusk, a phrase that appears again in Central European stories as a euphemism for possession. Could the dancing plague have been a cultural echo of such fears? A shared hallucination? A trance state triggered by terror? In 2008, a team of neurohistorians from the University of Lausanne attempted to model the Strasbourg outbreak using a combination of psychological contagion theory and crowd behavior analysis. Their model produced startling results. In highly stressed populations, synchronized motor activity can emerge organically, but only under specific conditions. Poor diet, extreme heat, rigid religious frameworks, and a suppressed population. When these factors are amplified by social reinforcement and trauma, the mind may seek bodily expression in unison. Strasbourg in 1518 met all four. Yet this does not explain why it has happened elsewhere. Yes, elsewhere. The dancing plague of 1518 was not the first of its kind. In 1374, in Aachen, a similar outbreak occurred. People danced in agony, screamed of visions, and collapsed en masse. In 1237, a group of children danced 12 miles from Erfurt to Arnstadt, later collapsing from exhaustion. Dozens of reports between the 13th and 17th centuries describe comparable afflictions, often referred to in church records as Chorus Sanctus, the Holy Circle. But none match the scale of Strasbourg, and none have occurred in modern times. Some believe something broke in our minds over the centuries, something that could once hear that rhythm. Others believe the rhythm simply moved on. But every so often, a report emerges. In 2011, in a village near the Iran-Afghanistan border, 7 women were hospitalized after dancing for nearly 24 hours. They claimed they were trying to shake off the dust in their ears. No music was playing. And in 2020, a group of schoolchildren in Uganda began twitching and jerking in unison. Officials called it mass psychogenic illness. But one student told a journalist, "I just needed to move. Something was watching." In 2022, hikers in Romania claimed to find strange circular impressions in the soil, deep in the forest, as though hundreds of feet had stamped a rhythmic pattern into the ground. They reported hearing no sound, but feeling the beat in their chests like a memory they hadn't lived. In 2023, footage surfaced online showing 3 commuters in a Warsaw train station spontaneously moving in perfect synchronization. Authorities blamed performance art. The video was deleted within days. There are no confirmed links, but there is a pattern, a rhythm. And when it returns, you won't hear it, your feet will. The Tunguska event, at precisely 7:17 a.m. on June 30th, 1908, a blinding light tore through the sky above the eastern Siberian taiga near the Podkamenaya Tunguska River. Witnesses described a bluish-white fireball brighter than the sun, followed by a deafening series of explosions that shattered windows and knocked people to the ground over 40 miles away. Then came the shockwave. Over 800 square miles of remote forest were flattened. Trees were scorched, stripped of branches, and pressed outward in a radial pattern from a central point as if the earth itself had exhaled in fury. The blast was later estimated to be equivalent to between 10 and 15 megatons of TNT, roughly 1,000 times more powerful than the bomb dropped on Hiroshima, yet there was no impact crater. For decades, the Tunguska event defied explanation. It wasn't until 1927, 19 years later, that the first scientific expedition reached ground zero. Led by Russian mineralogist Leonid Kulik, the team expected to find a massive crater, perhaps even fragments of a meteorite. Instead, they found swampy soil, tangled undergrowth, and thousands of trees snapped like matchstick saw pointing away from a single epicenter. But no stone, no iron, no debris. Kulik interviewed local Evenki and Yakut tribespeople who spoke of the god Ogdi descending in fire. One elderly hunter described reindeer bursting into flames and trees, glowing as if lit from within. Several reported strange atmospheric phenomena in the days following the blast: glowing skies, silvery clouds, and a persistent hum that echoed through the hills. Back in Europe, newspapers speculated on the cause. Was it a meteorite? A comet? A volcanic eruption? Theories multiplied. Some even proposed a small black hole passing through the Earth, or the accidental detonation of antimatter. None fully explained the lack of impact evidence. And then the anomalies began. Seismic stations as far away as London recorded tremors. Magnetic disturbances were noted in Irkutsk. And for several nights, skies across Europe and Asia glowed with strange luminescence, bright enough to read newspapers at midnight. Some scientists blamed high-altitude particles, others were less certain. Stranger still, no one died. Though the destruction zone was immense, no human casualties were officially recorded despite Evenki accounts of missing hunters and incinerated camps. Some researchers believe the area's sparse population explains this. Others aren't so sure. In the 1970s, Soviet archivists uncovered reports of an unregistered trading outpost near Vanavara, which disappeared from maps after 1908. No trace of it was found. Kulik's team returned several times between 1927 and 1939. They found no crater, but they did find unusual samples resin from trees containing microscopic metallic spheres composed of nickel and iron, elements often found in meteorites. Soil samples contained elevated levels of rare earth elements. The trees at the epicenter were not burned from the outside in, but from the inside out, as if the blast had occurred just above them, suspending in the sky. And something else. Plants in the blast zone grew faster in the years following the explosion. Pine trees developed abnormal cell structures. Genetic mutations were observed in local insect populations. Some trees at the very center of the blast zone, though charred, survived and continued growing faster and straighter than before. In 1958, with the dawn of the nuclear age, new theories emerged. Some scientists speculated the explosion bore a closer resemblance to an airburst than a meteor strike. Similar patterns were observed in the aftermath of atomic bomb tests. The idea of a cometary airburst took hold. A comet, composed mostly of ice and dust, entering the atmosphere and disintegrating before hitting the ground. But that left no solid evidence. In 1965, satellite imagery revealed subtle depressions beneath the forest canopy, forming an oddly geometric pattern. A few researchers posited this might have been caused by a symmetrical aerial detonation, possibly artificial. The Soviets dismissed the idea as Western paranoia, but they continued to classify parts of the region and restricted foreign access for decades. In 1993, a joint Russian-American expedition attempted a deeper investigation. They discovered a circular peat bog near the suspected epicenter containing high concentrations of iridium element rare on Earth but common in asteroids. But their instruments also detected unusually high background radiation, not enough to be dangerous but too much to ignore. The data was inconclusive, and the mystery remained. Then came the voice. In 2004, a hiker named Oleg Smirnov was traveling through the Tunguska region with a group of amateur geocachers. One night, as they camped near the river, Smirnov claimed he awoke to a low-frequency sound like a tuning fork buried in the ground. He wandered alone, following the vibration. What he believed he found was a clearing with no plants, no insects, no sound at all. In the center, a blackened tree stump split with a strange clean cut. Etched into the surface was a spiral, worn by age or heat. Smirnov later wrote, "I do not think it landed. I think it unfolded. It came from above, but also from beside. A shape that isn't a shape. Something intelligent, something watching." His account was dismissed. He offered no evidence. But 3 months later, he vanished during a solo return expedition. His last recorded GPS transmission placed him within 2 kilometers of the blast zone. More stories emerged in the following years. An Italian journalist claimed to have found a piece of blackened metal deep in the tundra that emitted a faint hum. A group of Russian students claimed to see a mirror of sky floating low between the trees. No photos were produced, no samples survived. Theories continue. Some claim it was an alien probe malfunctioning in Earth's atmosphere. Others suggest a natural geophysical phenomenon, explosive release of subterranean gas ignited by atmospheric friction. But the data rarely fits. Witness reports remain inconsistent but compelling. In 2013, a team from the Russian Academy of Sciences deployed advanced ground-penetrating radar across the Tunguska site. They discovered a dense object buried deep beneath the permafrost. Its exact shape could not be determined, but its reflectivity was anomalous. When they attempted to drill, their equipment failed, not broke. Failed as if the rock had turned to liquid, then re-solidified. They were instructed to halt operations and withdraw. Unofficial notes from that expedition included a drawing 5 concentric circles with a dark center. No explanation was given. The notes were leaked in 2018, but quickly scrubbed from public archives. Even now, the area is difficult to access. Permits are required. Satellites are often unreliable over the site. Pilots flying overhead have reported brief instrument malfunctions and compass drift. One pilot described seeing a perfectly circular shimmer hovering just below the cloud layer, like a window you could fall through. There is no crater, no body, no machine, only a silence too symmetrical to be natural. And trees that still grow towards something that isn't there. Whatever came to Tunguska didn't strike. It arrived, the Dyatlov Pass incident. In the dead of winter, February 1959, 9 Soviet hikers vanished in the Ural Mountains. When their bodies were eventually discovered, what investigators found was so disturbing, so utterly without rational cause, it would fracture explanations for decades and birth one of the most enduring mysteries in modern history. The group consisted of 8 experienced hikers from the Ural Polytechnic Institute, 7 men, and 2 women led by 23-year-old radio engineering student Igor Dyatlov. Their destination was Mount Otorten, a name that, in the language of the indigenous Mansi people, ominously translates to "don't go there." The journey, rated as a Category 3 trek, the highest level of difficulty, was a challenge they had prepared well for. Supplies, journals, and multiple cameras were all meticulously documented and packed. They were ready. The group set out from the Siberian town of Ivdel on January 27th, moving through dense forest and open plain, ascending toward the snow-covered highlands. On January 31st, they set up a base camp in a wooded valley. The following day, they began climbing toward what is now known as Dyatlov Pass. They would never return. Dyatlov had arranged to send a telegram to their sports club by February 12. When no message came, no one panicked. Delays in such conditions weren't unusual. But by February 20, with no word, the first search parties were dispatched, initially students and teachers, later joined by soldiers and police. What they found would become the foundation of one of Russia's strangest files. On February 26, searchers discovered the hiker's tent on the slope of Kholat-Syakhl-Mansi for Mountain of the Dead. The tent was half collapsed and covered in snow. It had been slashed open from the inside, as if the group had fled in panic. Their belongings were undisturbed. Boots, warm clothing, even axes and stoves remained. The scene was unnerving. It appeared the hikers had run into the sub-zero night barefoot and nearly naked. Footprints, preserved in the snow, led away from the tent in a disorganized pattern, some prints barefoot, some in socks, some with a single boot. The tracks continued for about 500 meters, leading into the forest at the base of the slope. The first bodies were found under a large cedar tree. Yuri Krivonishenko and Georgy Doroshenko lay side by side in only their underwear. Their hands were charred, as if they had tried to build a fire or something had burned them. Branches above them were broken up to 5 meters high, suggesting someone had climbed the tree, perhaps to look for something or someone. Between the tree and the tent, the search team found 3 more bodies: Dyatlov, Zinaida Kolmogorova, and Rustem Slobodin. They were spaced at intervals, all heading back toward the tent, as if trying to return. Slobodin had a fractured skull, but no other external wounds. Hypothermia was listed as the cause of death, but the injuries didn't quite add up. 2 months passed before the final 4 bodies were found, buried under 4 meters of snow in a nearby ravine. Their condition defied logic. Lyudmila Dubinina was missing her tongue, eyes, and parts of her face. Semyon Zolotaryov and Alexander Kolovatov had crushed ribs, massive internal injuries, yet no signs of trauma on the skin. One investigator compared the force to that of a car crash. Nikolai Thibault-Brignoles had similar trauma to the skull. All deaths were officially attributed to a compelling natural force. Investigators were baffled. No avalanche had occurred, the angle of the slope was too shallow. The tent had been erected properly and showed no signs of collapse or pressure. Radiation was detected on some of the victims' clothing, especially Zolotaryov's, who, it was later revealed, had military training. Speculation spread rapidly. Soviet authorities offered few answers. The case was closed quickly, documents classified, and the area restricted for years. Rumors flourished. A failed weapons test, secret military experiments, KGB entanglement, even Yetis. But stranger details kept surfacing. Local Mansi tribespeople had reported seeing fiery spheres in the sky the night of February 1st. These were corroborated by independent reports from the nearby town of Ivdel. Witnesses described glowing orbs moving silently through the aerorange, pulsating, sometimes hovering. A group of geologists working nearby also reported seeing the lights. They were dismissed as meteors or military flares, but the sightings coincided exactly with the time the hikers are believed to have died. In 1990, Lev Ivanov, the original investigator, broke his silence. He admitted he had been ordered to remove references to the lights from his report. In his personal notes, Ivanov wrote, "I suspected at the time and am almost sure now that these bright flying spheres had a direct connection to the group's death." One photograph recovered from a damaged camera, known only as Frame 34, shows a blurred object streaking across the sky. Skeptics call it a light artifact. Believers call it the key. A theory emerged that infrasound low-frequency sound waves generated by wind passing through the mountain's unique topography may have induced panic. Such waves can cause unease, nausea, and even hallucinations. If a freak wind event triggered irrational terror, the hikers may have fled, succumbing to the elements before realizing the danger was imaginary. But that doesn't explain the physical trauma, nor the missing tongue, nor the radiation, nor the lights. In 2013, modern researchers revisited the site. They noted a strange electromagnetic reading near the ravine. Compass needles spun slowly. GPS signals weakened. Instruments failed intermittently. One team member reported a metallic taste in his mouth for hours after leaving. Other hikers have reported bizarre sensations near Dyatlov Pass, disorientation, sudden fear, whispers in the wind. A few say they've dreamed of running, barefoot, through deep snow, of being watched, of lights. The official reinvestigation in 2020 again concluded an avalanche of unusual type. Yet this only raised more questions. Why cut the tent? Why not retrieve shoes or jackets just feet away? Why climb a tree? Why injuries that mimic high-impact trauma without visible bruising? Some point to Semyon Zolotaryov, whose military file remains partially classified. He joined the group late. Some theorize he carried sensitive materials or knew something. His camera, unlike the others, had an internal spool jammed with unprocessed film. Most of it was blank. One image, almost entirely black, showed a faint outline of a humanoid shape. And then there are the rumors of the 10th hiker. Early diaries reference a man named Sasha. No Sasha appears on the official manifest. Some say he left early, others say he never existed. Yet one journal entry reads, "Sasha said the mountain has a memory." Another, "We should not have come. Sasha was right." Was Sasha a local guide? A spy? A hallucination? No answers have ever surfaced. What remains are bones and frostbitten clues. Torn canvas. Unsettled snow. A patch of Siberia that has seen no repeat incident since. The past still draws visitors. Some bring Geiger counters, some bring offerings, all leave with unease. No wildlife nests there, no birds sing, just wind, and cold, and something watching, waiting to be seen again. The Solway Firth Spaceman. On May 23, 1964, in a quiet coastal area of Cumbria, England, a man named Jim Templeton took a photograph that would spark international controversy, intelligence investigations, and decades of speculation. What should have been an ordinary family photo became one of the most enduring modern mysteries. The image itself appears innocent enough. Jim, a firefighter and part-time photographer, had taken his family on a weekend outing to Burgh Marsh, a grassy expanse overlooking the Solway Firth. It was an unremarkably pleasant afternoon. The wind was calm, the sky a pristine blue. His wife Annie was preparing sandwiches nearby, while Jim posed their 5-year-old daughter, Elizabeth, on a gentle rise in the field. She wore a new blue dress and smiled shyly into the camera. Jim took 3 pictures. The first 2 showed nothing but Elizabeth and the background. But in the third, just over her shoulder, a figure appeared. A strange figure, one Jim swore was not there. The technician developing the photos noticed it first. He asked Jim, puzzled, "Who's the man in the suit?" Behind Elizabeth, a figure clad in white bulky and helmeted stood, facing slightly away, as if watching something off in the distance. The silhouette was stark, its presence immediate and surreal. It resembled, unmistakably, an astronaut. The story quickly spread. Newspapers dubbed it the Solway Firth Spaceman. It was picked up by the BBC and international outlets. Skeptics called it a hoax. But Kodak, the film's manufacturer, examined the negative and declared it genuine. There was no evidence of tampering, no double exposure, no signs of manipulation. And yet Jim insisted that no one else had been in the frame. He recounted every detail of the day. The field had been nearly deserted. Only his wife and daughter were nearby. Annie was wearing a pink dress. The figure in the photo wore white. And the proportions were wrong, too large, too angular to be her. Besides, Annie had been behind him, not behind Elizabeth. Experts from several agencies examined the photograph. The lighting on the figure did not match the surrounding scene. It cast a faint shadow, but appeared unusually luminous. Even stranger, the figure's head, or helmet, reflected no light, only a dark void where a visor or faceplate might have been. Some called it an illusion, a trick of perspective, but no one could fully replicate the image. Then came the visit. 3 days later, 2 men arrived at Jim's home. They wore dark suits and introduced themselves by numbers only, number 9 and number 11. They claimed to be from the government, but refused to identify their agency. Jim later described them as polite but unsettling, asking pointed questions about the photo, his camera, his movements, and the direction he had faced. They drove him back to Berg Marsh and asked him to reenact the scene. One of the men used a handheld device to sweep the grass. The other simply stared. After 30 minutes, without explanation, they left. Jim never heard from them again, but others did. 2 months later, a Blue Streak missile test at Woomera, a highly restricted military site in South Australia, was aborted due to the sudden appearance of 2 figures on the launch range. Both were described as wearing white suits. When security footage was reviewed, engineers noted the strange similarity between one of the figures and the spaceman in Jim's photo. One engineer who had seen the photograph wrote to Jim stating, "I thought you should know. Your spaceman was here too." Jim had never traveled to Australia. The connection was never officially acknowledged. But whispers spread through defense circles. Skeptics attempted to explain the figure. Some said it was Annie, caught in a candid overexposure. But the height, angle, and shadow placement didn't fit. A later analysis in 1996 by a digital imaging specialist confirmed the figure's spatial orientation was behind Elizabeth, not beside her. Another theory involved lens flare or an overexposed light leak. Yet Kodak again dismissed this. The photo had none of the indicators of chemical damage or flaring. Others suggested a parachutist or a distant hiker, but the figure's clean, symmetrical outline defied those explanations. And then came the letters. Over the following years, Jim received correspondence from dozens of individuals across the world. Some shared similar photos, figures in fields, at forest edges, always wearing pale suits, often helmeted. One letter from Argentina described a figure walking across a field outside Cordoba in 1955, witnessed by a group of 6 people. Another from Finland recalled a glowing humanoid on the banks of the Kemi River. Always they came without sound. Always they vanished without trace. In 2002, a Norwegian man sent Jim a scanned copy of a painting his grandfather had made in 1948. It showed a woman and child in a grassy field with a pale figure in the background. The resemblance was uncanny, bulky, faceless, distant. There were no known astronauts in 1948. In 2007, a Freedom of Information Act request uncovered a partially redacted Ministry of Defense memo labeled Low Visibility Presence, Berg Marsh Incident. The file mentioned unusual electromagnetic readings and requested quiet monitoring of the area. The document was dated June 1964, 2 weeks after the photo was taken. It was signed by a Deputy Undersecretary of the Air Ministry. No further notes were attached. Researchers visiting the site in 2011 recorded intermittent magnetic anomalies. One described his compass spinning gently for several seconds before returning to normal. Wildlife was oddly absent that day. Birds remained at the far edge of the marsh. And then there's the hum. In 2014, an acoustic engineer named Darren Melrose was testing portable microphones for wildlife monitoring. While capturing ambient audio at Solway, he recorded a recurring low-frequency pulse occurring every 11.2 seconds. It was outside the range of human hearing but visible on spectrographic analysis. When compared to historical field recordings from the 1970s, the pulse was already present, identical in interval. It has no known source. Jim Templeton remained steadfast until his death in 2011. He never sought profit, never revised his story. "I know what I saw," he said in one of his last interviews. Or rather, "I know what I didn't see. There was no one there." His daughter, Elizabeth, now grown, has never spoken publicly about the photo. Friends say she avoids the subject. Some say she experiences vivid dreams of standing still while something tall moves slowly behind her. The photograph remains in the public domain, housed in archives and duplicated across the internet. No definitive explanation has ever been found. It is simply there. A child smiles, the sun shines, a family poses, and behind it all, something watching or waiting. A man in white where no man stood. A presence recorded but never seen, and a question left open, not what it was, but why it came at all. The man from Taured. In July 1954, a man stepped off a plane at Tokyo's Haneda airport. He appeared to be an average European businessman, well-dressed, middle-aged, and confident. He carried a briefcase, spoke fluent French, Japanese, and several other languages, and presented a passport issued by a country no one had ever heard of, Taured. Initially, airport officials thought it was a mistake, but the passport looked authentic. It had immigration stamps from previous visits to Japan, as well as entries from European countries, including Spain and Portugal. The man claimed this was his third trip to Japan that year on business. He even produced a driver's license and bank documents from Taured. Authorities were baffled. When they asked him to point out Taured on a map, he placed his finger on the small country of Andorra between France and Spain. But when shown the map labeled Andorra, the man became visibly agitated. He said his country had existed for 1,000 years and should be right there, Taured, between France and Spain. He insisted that something was wrong, that the map was incorrect. Suspecting a forgery, authorities detained the man and took him to a room in a nearby hotel under guard while they investigated. They checked his documents again. The passport still appeared legitimate, with customs stamps from airports around the world. His checks matched his business card, which listed a company no one could verify. The bank listed on his documents existed, but had no record of him. The hotel he said he booked had no reservation under his name. The company he claimed to be meeting with had never heard of him. When airport officials returned to the hotel the next morning, the man was gone. The guards claimed no one had entered or exited the room. The window was several stories up, locked from the inside. His documents, passport, and briefcase all vanished. The Tokyo police conducted a thorough search of nearby hospitals, psychiatric institutions, and international embassies. Nothing. No person by that name had entered Japan before or since. No trace of the man remained. The story was quietly buried in an internal security report. But rumors leaked. Journalists pieced together what little was available and began calling it the case of the man from Taured. In 1960, a former customs official gave an anonymous interview to a Tokyo newspaper. He described the man as confused but not mad, and stated he believed completely in what he said, as if the world had shifted beneath him and he alone remained from somewhere else. The phenomenon gained renewed attention in the late 1980s when a researcher at Kyoto University unearthed a classified file from 1954 titled Unidentified Foreign National, though heavily redacted. The file confirmed that a man with a passport from a non-existent country had been detained and interviewed by both Japanese and American intelligence officers. In the margins of one page was scrawled, "Subject exhibits high confidence, claims multiple corroborations, verify potential Type V breach." The term Type V breach has never been defined publicly. Skeptics argue that the case was a fabrication urban legend exaggerated by Cold War paranoia. Others point to the possibility of a confused traveler with a rare neurological disorder like confabulation or dissociative amnesia. But these don't explain the passport, the matching stamps, or the sudden disappearance. Still others believe the man from Tauride was never of this world, or at least not of this timeline. In 1999, a linguist named Dr. Katsuhiro Manabe published a paper comparing alternate nation names from ancient cartography and micronations declared by eccentric rulers. Tauride never appeared in any historical record. No coins, no documents, no royal lineage, nothing, as if it never existed or existed somewhere else. Then came the footage. In 2003, a former airline worker named Masaru Fuji came forward with a grainy 16mm reel from Haneda's customs checkpoint dated July 1954. The film, though degraded, shows a man in a light grey suit arguing with officials. A freeze frame reveals him holding a dark blue passport. The photo, when enhanced, appears to show a crest with two concentric circles and unfamiliar characters. Not Latin, not Cyrillic, not Japanese. The reel was authenticated. The airport logbooks show a disruption that day, with two unnamed customs officers placed on temporary leave. No reasons are listed. One of those officers, now in his 90s, refused to comment when tracked down in 2011. But his daughter later told a journalist, he never flew again after that. Said there were places you could end up and not come back from. In 2017, a security contractor working with the Japanese Ministry of Transport leaked a fragment of a 1965 interdepartmental memo. It references a temporal displacement event, civilian contact, and notes, containment achieved, civilian returned or removed, no residual cross-manifestations recorded. The line between misidentification and intrusion had blurred. Some theorists connect the Tauride incident to similar anomalies around the world: travelers with incorrect passports, people speaking dead languages, or claiming histories that don't align with known timelines. In 1973, a man was arrested in Mexico City for trespassing on military grounds. He spoke perfect Spanish, but insisted he was from a country called Lisbia. When corrected that the country is called Portugal, he reportedly panicked and asked if the capital was still Faro, not Lisbon. He vanished from custody within 48 hours. Other cases are more obscure. A woman in Germany holding a rail pass issued by the Soviet Republic of Prussia. A sailor who arrived in Australia in 1929 aboard a ship that didn't exist. A man who tried to check into a Chicago hotel in 1990 with a currency called dollar. The Tauride case, however, remains the most documented and the most disconcerting. In 2021, a French researcher, Elodie Marchand, discovered a peculiar discrepancy while compiling an atlas of micronations and fictional countries. She found that several travelers from the mid-20th century referenced an international route that passed through Tauride or Taurid, inconsistently spelled but matching phonetic cues. None of these travelers' descendants remembered the accounts, and all entries vanished in later editions. Even more strangely, a 1924 Parisian travel agency advertisement, reprinted in a rare newspaper archive, listed a package deal to Tauride, the Pearl of the Pyrenees. No maps, no government seals, and no follow-up records exist. In 2022, A cryptographer decoding fragments of failed telex transmissions between embassies uncovered a message from July 1954 reading, "Unrecognized delegate from Taurith demands recognition of passage, passport inspected, signature confirmed, holding pending clarification, it was never sent. These scattered threads don't resolve. They fray." A man stepped off a plane into the wrong world. He carried documents no one could explain, spoke languages he shouldn't know, and believed in a country that has never existed except to him. There is no trace of Taurid. Not on maps, not in texts, not in treaties. But for one brief moment in 1954, it was real enough to challenge the borders of history, and perhaps still exists, not here, but somewhere just one wrong turn away. The lead masks case. On August 20th, 1966, a young boy flying a kite on the Morro do Vintema steep hill in Niterói, Brazil stumbled across something that would rattle investigators, mystify journalists, and ignite one of the most enduring unsolved mysteries in modern Latin American history. There, partially concealed by scrub and grass, lay the bodies of two men side by side. Their formal suits were strangely clean despite the muddy terrain. Raincoats covered their torsos. In one man's hand, a notebook. On their faces, lead masks. Not helmets, not theatrical props. Handmade lead masks shaped like welding goggles, molded tightly to cover the eyes. Protective gear, but against what? Police arrived later that day. The bodies were quickly identified. They were Manuel Pereira de Cruz and Miguel José Viana, two electronic technicians from the nearby town of Campos dos Goitacazes. Both were in their early 30s. Neither had a history of mental illness or criminal behavior. Both had left their homes 2 days prior, telling their families they were headed to São Paulo to buy materials for work. But instead of tools or equipment, the only items found with them were a bottle of water, 2 wet towels, cash, a strange handwritten note, and the lead masks. The note was cryptic. It read, 1630, be at the agreed place. 1830, ingest capsules. After effect protect metals await signal mask. There were no capsules found. No signs of struggle. No visible wounds. No traces of radiation or chemical exposure. The autopsy was inconclusive, largely due to delays in the examination and the badly decomposed state of the bodies. The local coroner stated, "I cannot determine a cause of death." Toxicology tests were never completed. The case was closed without resolution. But the questions lingered. Theories began almost immediately. Some believed it was suicide ritualistic, perhaps tied to a fringe spiritualist movement. Others suspected the men were attempting to contact extraterrestrial life. Some even posited that they were the victims of a secret military experiment or a government cover-up. Journalists scoured their backgrounds. Both men had shown interest in spiritualism, specifically the idea of contacting beings from other planes of existence. According to friends and family, they had attended meetings of a group devoted to scientific spiritualism, where theories of energy manipulation, telepathy, and interdimensional contact were discussed. Several weeks before their deaths, both had reportedly attempted a similar experiment in a remote location, where they claimed to have received a message from beyond, accompanied by a burst of blinding light. But what exactly had they been preparing for on that hill? Lead masks are not a standard component in any spiritualist ritual, nor do they appear in engineering manuals or protective gear inventories of the time. When asked, a local metalworker, who fabricated similar objects, said the masks were clearly custom-made, possibly by the men themselves. They were poorly cut, with rough edges, and had no visibility through them. One investigator noted that they were designed not for vision, but for protection. But protection from what? Some theorists pointed to electromagnetic radiation. In the 1960s, Brazil was undergoing rapid technological advancement. There were rumors of experimental radar installations in the nearby region. Could the men have believed they were shielding their brains or eyes from high-frequency waves? Another theory: they expected a bright flash of light, perhaps from an object descending from the sky. Witnesses in the area reported strange aerial phenomena in the days surrounding their deaths. A local fisherman swore he saw a glowing orange oval floating above the hill the night they were believed to have died. Then came the testimony of a waitress. 2 days before their bodies were found, the men had stopped at a bar near the base of the hill. The waitress recalled them being nervous, checking their watches frequently. They purchased a bottle of water unusual, as they claimed they needed it to purify something. She remembered one of them saying, "Soon it begins. Soon what begins?" Investigators attempted to retrace their movements. They had taken a bus partway up the hill, then walked the rest. Along the path, they left behind no messages, no trail, no signs of confusion or hesitation. It seemed deliberate, planned. They had chosen the location and the time. Back to the note. 16:30 be at the agreed place, 18:30 ingest capsules. What was at 18:30? No thunderstorm, no celestial event, no known satellite launch. Yet something had prompted them to ingest unknown capsules, possibly sedatives or hallucinogens, and lie down, side by side, awaiting a signal. Researchers began to explore esoteric texts and fringe spiritualist doctrines from the 1950s and 60s. A recurring motif emerged, masking the soul to meet the light. In some occult traditions, lead was used to shield the spirit during astral projection or contact with superior intelligences. One text, translated from Portuguese, read, "The eyes must be covered, lest the unprepared mind be scorched by divine radiance." Was that what they were doing, preparing to meet something that would manifest in blinding light? Years later, an anonymous source came forward claiming to have been a member of the same spiritualist group. He said the men believed they could summon beings from another dimension through a precise combination of location, time, and personal purity. They weren't mad, he said. They were believers. They thought the signal would open the veil. But if there was a signal, it never came, or if it did, it left no trace. In 1990, the case was reopened briefly after a television documentary renewed interest. A retired detective who had worked the scene confessed that the lead masks had unsettled him more than anything he'd seen. They looked like blindfolds for another world, he said. In 2002, a researcher from the Federal University of Rio uncovered a curious detail in archived police logs. The original responding officer wrote that the watches on both men had stopped at exactly 6:35 p.m. 5 minutes after the time noted for ingestion. Why both watches would fail at the same time remained unexplained. In 2008, amateur investigators hiking the hill reported discovering small metallic fragments embedded in the soil nearby. The fragments were later tested and found to contain traces of thallium, a toxic metal not commonly found in consumer products, but used in high-grade electronics and certain covert weaponry. Was someone watching them? Was the experiment interrupted? The case file contains conflicting witness statements about a third man seen walking near the hill on the evening in question. Described as tall, pale, and wearing a beige trench coat, he was never identified. A fruit vendor claimed he spoke with a strange accent, while a cyclist reported seeing the same figure staring up toward the hill from the road below. Others believe the men were victims of deception, tricked by a charismatic leader or cult figure who promised revelation and left them to die. But no such leader was ever identified. Then there's the matter of the missing capsules. Despite a careful search of the site, no capsules were found, no containers, nothing to suggest ingestion had occurred. And yet, their behavior suggests they believed in a coming change, an event that never materialized. By 2010, public interest in the lead masks case had faded, but not disappeared. Conspiracy forums and digital archives preserve theories ranging from interdimensional contact to time travel mishaps. A 2017 podcast reignited interest by interviewing a woman who claimed to be the niece of one of the men. She said her uncle had kept a private journal filled with diagrams of energy fields, references to the metal face, and instructions for preparing the body for harmonic convergence. No such journal was ever located. Today, the hill remains quiet, overgrown. But some say they've seen flashes of light on its slopes, brief, unnatural. Others report dreams of metallic masks and whispering voices. Local children avoid the area after dark. It has a reputation, not haunted, just waiting for someone else to return. With the right instructions and the right kind of mask. The silent cathedral of Quebec. In the shadowy folds of old Quebec, nestled between the wooded banks of the St. Lawrence River and the crumbling edge of forgotten parish land, stands a church with no records. Locals call it simply La Cathédrale Muette, the Silent Cathedral. Officially, it does not exist. And yet, it has stood there, unmoving and unclaimed, for well over a century. It is not listed in any architectural registry. It does not appear in maps, old or new. Pilots flying overhead claim to lose signal over its coordinates, as if some pocket of silence ripples upward from its steeple. And for generations, no one has heard a single sound from within its walls. The cathedral first appeared in conversation in 1899, in a footnote scribbled at the margin of a Jesuit missionary's journal. The priest, Etienne Morel, described it as a structure seen from afar, with stones blackened as if by fire but untouched by heat. He noted that he and his mule driver came within 100 paces, but could go no further. Something in the air grew heavy, he wrote. The bells did not ring, though we were certain we heard them. No bells hang in the steeple. Morel's companion, a man named Jacques Lemieux, refused to speak of it again. When pressed, he said only, "It sees through you." Over the decades, the church's presence became an open secret among locals, spoken of in low voices, never directly acknowledged. Children were warned not to play near the forest edge, especially after dark. Hunters avoided its surrounding acres, yet no government body, ecclesiastical or civil, claimed it, and no demolition crew would approach it. In 1934, a doctoral candidate in religious history at Université Laval named Benoit Charron conducted what he believed would be the first academic study of the structure. He was found 2 days later, barefoot and catatonic, in a field 3 kilometers away. He carried no notes, but his coat was stuffed with pages torn from medieval manuscripts, known of which belonged to his known collection. One page contained a single sentence in Latin: "Et factum est silentium in coelo quasi media horror." and there was silence in heaven for about half an hour. No one could explain how Charon came by the parchment, later dated to the 1400s. The cathedral's stone facade is a peculiar shade of grey that shifts subtly with the light. Photographs tend to blur at the edges when the building is in frame, as if the lens struggles to resolve its outline. Attempts to capture audio from within 100 meters result in recordings filled with static, punctuated by long, low pulses almost like a heartbeat, but measured, mechanical. In 1961, a team of acousticians from Montreal attempted to chart the sonic dead zone surrounding the cathedral. They set up parabolic microphones at increasing distances. At 137 meters, all sound ceased: wind, birds, footsteps. A graduate assistant named Alain reported the pressure in his ears increasing dramatically. "It felt like I had been dropped into deep water," he said. But everything was still. They left before nightfall. A report was filed but quickly sealed by provincial authorities. None of the researchers returned to the site. The most complete account of an interior exploration comes from a forestry surveyor named Eveline Marchand in 1972. She claimed she entered the cathedral through a side door after getting separated from her team. Inside, she found no pews, no altar, no religious iconography, only a spiral staircase descending into darkness. "I followed the stairs for what felt like hours," she told a local reporter years later. "It was perfectly silent, but I could hear my own breathing echo in a way that didn't match the space." She turned back after seeing what she described as rows of chairs facing nothing. She remembered their proportions being slightly wrong, like they had been made for someone taller, or bent forward in prayer forever. She suffered from intense vertigo and recurring migraines for the rest of her life. Geographic surveys taken over the years show that the land beneath the cathedral is not solid earth, but cavernous, full of voids and chambers. A 1988 seismographic reading registered a low-frequency hum beneath the site, persistent and rhythmically stable. It has no known natural cause. There are whispers never formally published of a Vatican inquiry in 1993. Local records show an uptick in visitors with Italian surnames, one of whom, identified as Fafta El Benedetti, was seen entering the forest and never seen again. An unsigned letter later arrived at the diocese office in Quebec City, stating only, "There is no mass in that house. It was not built for us." More recently, in 2007, a crew shooting drone footage for a travel documentary lost signal precisely over the cathedral's location. The footage recovered showed frames of the forest thinning into a clearing. At the edge of the last viable frame, the cathedral appears only briefly. The stone looks darker than expected. The windows reflect nothing. Digital artifacting corrupted the final 2 seconds of the clip. An audio technician isolated a faint tone beneath the interference. When analyzed, it resembled a vocal register, a single vowel held steady for nearly 0.7 seconds, followed by complete silence. Attempts to enhance it failed. The technician later reported that listening to the raw waveform gave him headaches and nosebleeds. Urban explorers continue to seek the cathedral, though few claim to find it. Those who do often bring back vague stories of strange rustling without wind, of shadows that do not track with the sun. Some describe an overwhelming urge to remain, to sit in the non-existent pews, to wait for something unnamed. One journal entry recovered from an explorer's abandoned camp read simply, "I think it's listening now." A Quebec folklore archivist Marie-Hélène Gauthier, documented more than 20 oral accounts involving the cathedral between 1942 and 2002. In a recorded interview from 1981, an elderly farmer describes how his grandfather, a fur trapper, once found a trail that shouldn't have been there. At the end stood a building that shimmered like wet stone under moonlight. He claimed the trees bent away from it. In 2015, a Quebec-based geospatial firm was contracted to develop a high-resolution topographic model of the area. During the flyover, their instruments captured a sudden 2.1-second data blackout at an altitude of 300 meters. Their software logged it as a data void. Engineers noted that nothing like it had occurred elsewhere on the survey route. No explanation was offered. The last known physical visit occurred in 2018 by a retired geography professor named Clément Durocher. He published a brief article in a fringe journal recounting his impressions. He wrote, "The cathedral does not occupy space the way buildings do. It occupies silence, and that silence presses inward. It's not the absence of noise. It's the presence of something waiting, something still. Satellite imagery still shows nothing. Yet locals insist it's there. A priest who once lived in the nearby parish, now long retired, put it best. Some places were never meant to echo with voices. That building, it was made to contain a silence deeper than we understand. And still it waits, beneath the trees, where the wind stops and the sky feels just a little too far away. The silent cathedral is not haunted. It is not abandoned. It is simply watching. And when you step inside, you will find that it already knows your name. The past doesn't always vanish. Sometimes it slips just out of sight waiting to be remembered. The events you've witnessed here weren't designed to offer clean conclusions. They were meant to remind you that history is not finished. It stutters, doubles back, and occasionally opens a door it never meant to. Some stories refuse to stay buried. And if you've made it this far, perhaps you're already listening for what comes next. So stay curious, stay watchful. And if you're drawn to the places where history blurs and certainty falters, subscribe, share, and return. Because the strangest truths are often the ones hiding in plain sight.